So today, my session is about escapism, and it's slightly ironic that it's on Father's Day because we're going to look at a woman without a father. Um, I want to make a couple of caveats before I start. So we're going to enjoy the life of Sarah Bernhardt today. And I'm saying enjoy because her life as much as her work was a performance. Now, before we started, I was having a chat to Gila and Ari did something which will absolutely terrify any scholar, which was he talked to me about last week's session, telling me all the sources that he'd checked and how he'd gone away and researched people in it. We had a little bit of a discussion about one of the things, and actually, he's absolutely right to query one of the things that I suggested because it's got a kind of contested origin. So thank you, first of all, Ari, for listening with such attention, and thank you for putting the fear of God into me. So I am, sorry, first of all, I'm not sure whose screen this is, but in a minute I'm going to share my own screen. Let's just maybe stop Alan sharing his. Um, so I am today going to do Sarah Bernhardt, but I'm telling you right now that pretty much nothing I say is going to be verifiable. That's not my fault, that's her fault. So, unlike some of the other people that I'm talking about, where really they're kind of my own original kind of research and people I spent a long time in the archives looking at, Sarah Bernhardt I'm teaching because she appeared in the stories of so many of the other people I was looking at, but also she's just so fun and fascinating. But I had to go throughout to secondhand source material, so biographies and autobiographies. In a minute, what I'm going to show you is every single one of the major sources tells a different story. So, what I'm going to teach you about Sarah Bernhardt is what is the general consensus, plus some facts and allusions that we just can't trust, but we hope might be true. Because whether it's her own autobiography, My Double Life, and that double life absolutely says it all, whether it's her granddaughter's accounts, whether it's her granddaughter's husband's accounts. They wrote two separate biographies of Sarah Bernhardt after she died and told very different facts of the versions of the same facts in both. Whether it's Robert Gottlieb's Jewish Lives account or one of the theatrical biographies, there is hardly any consensus between them. So, just to put that out there right now, this is a woman who performed her life as much as she performed on the stage. And I'm going to take that into looking at her. But the one thing that everybody does when they talk about her is describe her as divine. So she was a remarkable woman, and I think well worth our time exploring. So let me go to my full screen. So here we've got an image of her, and I chose this photograph as my opening slide because you can see the tears. And Sarah Bernhardt has been talked about as the first modern actress because she was naturalistic. She felt the emotions that she played. I have to say, we're going to see a little clip of her performing, and I'm not sure nowadays we'd consider her naturalistic at all. But I think it is worth knowing that one of the ways in which she shook the French acting world and then the international acting world was because they felt like they really believed what she was portraying. This wasn't just any more gesturing or kind of moving your body to indicate something, but someone who truly felt the roles. And actually, she felt some of her roles so much that I think she took the stories of the characters she played and wove them into her own biography and autobiography. My favourite quote about her, and part of what fascinates me, comes from Stuart Jeffries, who wrote one of those biographies of her as an actress. He looked at her theatrical career. And I thought this for me said it all. So Sarah Bernhardt was an enigmatic, ultimately one-legged, probably bisexual, part Jewish, self-mythologizing, hunting and travelling enthusiast. She was also quite possibly the greatest actor ever. So welcome to an hour spent with Sarah Bernhardt. So let's have a look at her and why I think she's worth us studying. So these are her dates, 1844 to 1923. A reasonably long life, and pretty much every year of it filled with interest. She played, and this is why they say she's one of the greatest actresses ever. She played at least 70 roles in 125 productions. She was the first international stage star. So many of those productions she took on tour through Europe, the United States, Canada, South America, Australia, and the Middle East. And she was also not just an actress, but she was a producer and a theatre manager. She actually managed several of the theatres in Paris and then leased the Théâtre des Nations, which was renamed Theatre Sarah Bernhardt. So it was renamed for her. Actually, interestingly and challengingly, when the Nazis occupied Paris, they took her name off the building. But quite recently, while it hasn't been renamed the Sarah Bernhardt Theatre. If you go there, the main auditorium is now the Sarah Bernhardt Auditorium. So it's taken a long time, but her name is back in the building. But that career of not just being, you know, considered a naturalistic actor, but an actor who had such a range that she acted across multiple countries. And actually, as I'm going to show you a little later, she was also a silent movie star. I mean, it really makes her one of the greats. And using the word modern actors, modern in every sense, modern in the way she took on the roles, but modern because that was her period. So how did I get interested in her? This is a photograph taken in 2016 at the British Library. Gila mentioned that that was one of the places that I worked, and I was actually there for about 13 years, developing learning programs around their exhibitions and collections. And this is a photograph from 2016 when we did our big Shakespeare exhibition. So if you are interested in Shakespeare, and if this series goes well, maybe I'll come back another time and talk about that, because the whole reason I was brought in to work on that exhibition was because of the Merchant of Venice. No one else wanted to touch it, and in our research and the archival work we did around it, we found all sorts of really interesting undiscovered material about Shakespeare and the Jews who lived around him in the East End of London. But I'm putting that aside for now and I'm going to Hamlet, because one of the big debates was, if you're going to have an exhibition on Shakespeare, which skull do you use when you set up the Hamlet exhibition? We had all sorts of first folios with quartos. We had, you know, different speeches, different versions of To Be or Not to Be. We had the manuscripts, but we had to choose a skull. And there was huge debate. And this skull that we went with, and you can see it being installed in that photograph, was Sarah Bernhardt's skull. And it was chosen for two reasons. One is, amongst all our curators and academics, it was decided her Hamlet was the most iconic Hamlet. But also that skull that she used when she played Hamlet was a gift to her from Victor Hugo. So we don't know whose skull it was, and it is a real skull of a real person, but we know that it was Victor Hugo who gave it to Sarah Bernhardt, and that felt like such an interesting thing to explore. And I'm going to come to Victor Hugo a little bit later because he was instrumental in her career. But you can see here, you know, a woman playing Hamlet, playing a trouser role when she did, is absolutely mold breaking. One of the really interesting things is, I don't know if anyone saw on Broadway a few years ago, there was a play written about her playing Hamlet. Here we've got Janet McTeer in the role, and you can see her in her leather trousers, because the whole thing is the trouser role. there was this massive debate because the whole thing about the play was how shocking it was for her to take on playing a male role. That's how it was written, and it was written as the kind of background to her playing Hamlet at the time and her intrigues with her leading men, all of which were customary. But what was really interesting, and a lot of the critics picked up, was the writing wasn't brilliant because actually throughout her life, Sarah Bernhardt had played trouser roles. So in Shakespeare's time, we were used to men playing women, but actually almost from the very beginning of her career, Sarah Bernhardt had played men. So actually Hamlet, which was later on, it was about 30 years into her stage acting world, for her was nothing new. For the rest of the world, it was groundbreaking. For her, it was just another time that she was doing something she wanted to do and no one was going to tell her that she couldn't. Let's go back though. How did she get to this point? So she was born in July or possibly September or maybe October of 1844, depending which biography you believe. Or perhaps it was 1843. It might even have been 1841. She's born in Paris at number 5 Rue l'École de Médecins, and that's where the plaque is. But it might have been at number 32. It might have been at 265, and it might have been on another street altogether. It might have been on Rue Saint-Honoré, or it might have been on a third street again. You beginning to get the picture? Every single fact about her life, down to when she was born, not just what year, but what month, what street, what number on the street. You get multiple different stories. What Robert Gottlieb, who wrote the Yale Jewish Lives story of her life, which, by the way, if you're going to go away after this and read one book about her, that one is the one I'd recommend. It is such a rollicking good read. But what he says is she's a complete realist when dealing with her life, but a relentless fabulist when recounting it. So most of these facts are from her telling different people different accounts. And he loves the fact, and he really goes to town on the fact that actually, if you look at her, she is from a relatively poor family. She's a single mother, scraping to make ends meet, who turns into the equivalent of Angelina Jolie today, you know, most famous actress in the world and a multi-million equivalent to a multi-millionaire to boot. To get to that point, she has to be a pragmatist, she has to be hardworking, but she also has to be someone who creates herself. Like, it's not just that she is becoming a great actor, she is creating a mythology of a star. Okay. Let's look at where she comes from, though, and let's look at the Jewish backgrounds of where she comes from. This is one of the first, by the way, of the photos taken of her that's an acting photo. This is taken when she's 16. And you can see the curly dark hair. Actually, I believe it's darkened a bit there. It's reddish in reality. But she looks incredibly Jewish, doesn't she? She looks like a typical Jewish woman. She's not at all the image of the great French beauty. And she isn't really French, or she's born in France, but she's an immigrant. So her mother is Dutch. Her mother is Julie Bernard, but also in some of the biographies, she's Judith, or her nickname Yule. Yule is mostly how Sarah refers to her. And she's a courtesan or a prostitute. Courtesan is really upper class terminology for prostitute. She was born, Julie or Yule, was actually born to a middle class family in Holland. Her father, so Sarah's grandfather, Maurice Bernard, or possibly Bernhardt, was an oculist, a kind of early form of an optician. And his wife, Jeanette, whose maiden name was Hart, or sometimes Hard or Van Hard, you can see Bernhardt is actually from her grandmother and grandfather's names be put together. Julie's parents. So when Julie or Yule is 15, Jeanette died, and Maurice remarries, and apparently there is the equivalent of a wicked stepmother who doesn't really want Maurice's children there. So Julie Yule, who is, again, the date is kind of hard, but she's something around 14, 15, and her sister Rosine flee. They're turned out of their home. They've got nothing to do in Amsterdam. So they go basically to find somewhere to live and somewhere to create a life. Part of that fleeing is that Julie, when she goes, is pregnant. So all her children will be illegitimate. But actually, at the time she leaves her father and stepmother in Holland, she's not pregnant with Sarah. That will come a tiny bit later. She's pregnant with twins, and those twins actually die. So a 14, 15-year-old pregnant with twins who die, this is a really hard, you know, childhood for Yule. We think that the twins' father was a student named Morel, and if it is the student named Morel, there is a possibility he is also Sarah's father. But anyway, Morel becomes a naval officer. He is not someone who ever takes on the role of fatherhood. It's her uncle who will sign as father in her baptism certificate. I'll come to that a bit later. And Morel had not helped Yule when she was pregnant at 14, 15 with the twins. So Yule and Rosine go to Brussels, then London, and end up in Paris. And Yule tries to make a living. And the thing that a young Jewish girl in the late 18 or the mid 1800s can do is sew. So, like many Jews before and after her, she becomes a seamstress. And that's her official job, Yule's official job. But it isn't enough to live off, and it's not enough to support her sister. Actually, there is an older sister, Henrietta, who follows them to Paris, and Henrietta is married. She's the only one of Yule's siblings who will have a kind of respectable life. But Henrietta at that point can't afford to help out much either. So this teenager, unsurprisingly, earns some money by sleeping with men. Her reputation has been ruined by that initial pregnancy. And she gets pregnant again, and that pregnancy is Sarah. And whether that pregnancy is with Morel again, or it's with one of the men she saw, we never know. Sarah speculates, and in various of her own autobiographies and stories she tells to friends, she makes up stories about seeing her father, but it's never quite clear who he is. There are various candidates. It could be actually that the man she's describing meeting is in fact the uncle, Yule's brother, Edward, who is the one who will eventually sign her baptism certificate. It could be there's a grain of truth. And again, we don't know. But on Father's Day, that sense of being fatherless becomes defining for Sarah. And it's not just that she's fatherless, it's that she ends up motherless too, because this is one of the very rare photos of Yule with Sarah as a young woman. Yule's quite traumatized. Sarah describes Yule, and actually other people describe Yule as kind of a feckless and a cruel and a distant mother. But I think we have to look at the fact that, Yule is very, very young. She doesn't quite know what she's doing. And she's, by this point, kind of being used and abused by men. And then she just decides that, well, she's going to social climb, and if this is what's going to happen to her anyway, she's going to use it to get ahead. So actually, she barely brings Sarah up. Sarah spends her childhood with various different people. Sometimes it's family members, often it's people Yule is paying to be a nurse. Occasionally it's just people who are living in the building that Yule leaves her with and then goes off. So Sarah ends up not really having a mother for many of the first years of her life, as much as she didn't have a father. And that is really part of, I think, what gives her this urge to succeed, this drive. She wants to be loved. Yule will have two more daughters, and her next daughter, Jean, who is born when Sarah is about 7 or 8, depending again what you believe about her age, is the one Yule will kind of keep and protect as a child. She then, again, these are all by different men. We don't quite know who they are. We don't know if it's deliberate or accidental. She will have a further daughter, Regine, but she abandons her a bit like Sarah. And Sarah, who is much older than her, actually ends up kind of mothering her younger sister too. So it's a very complicated family. Um, so she spends her childhood, Sarah, who by the way isn't at this point called Sarah, I'll come to that in a moment, spends her childhood with grandparents, well, grandmother, um, grandfather and grand stepmother, her aunts, her cousins. Then she's put into a place with a hired nurse. And then when she's 12, they decide she needs to go to convent school. So what's happened is until she is 7, um, she's not with family members. And in fact, she's in Brittany. Her first language isn't French, it's Breton, and she can't read or write. When her aunt comes to visit her and discover this, she's really upset. She encourages Yule to be a more involved mother, takes Sarah out of that situation and puts her in this kind of pension with a kind of day school. But she learns some French, but by the time she is 12, she's still not very literate. And she's growing older, she's growing towards teenagehood. And Yule goes, I need to do something to make her able to fit in with society. And she decides that actually she's got so many strikes against her, being illegitimate, being a Breton speaker more than a French speaker, being Jewish, and being the daughter of a prostitute, that she needs to remake her daughter into a respectable person if she's going to give her any chance of a life. So she sends her to convent school to be raised as a Catholic. It's very complicated. This is loved by, I mean, at the beginning, Sarah hates this, but actually, she completely falls in love with the Mother Superior and the abbess because they're the first people to be really motherly towards her. And she ends up having a very few happy years at convent school. But being a Jewish child who's known to be Jewish in a Catholic environment is complicated, however much she tries to be someone who fits in. She goes completely the other way. She tries too hard and she decides she wants to become a nun, which actually to the Jewish family is almost as bad as her possibly becoming a prostitute or courtesan like her mother. Um, it becomes kind of a very interesting childhood. You know, at the moment when hopefully our daughters and granddaughters are having their bat mitzvah, what does she do? Well, rather than learning how to read Torah, learning about her Jewish identity, she's playing the angel Raphael at the convent for a visit by the Archbishop of Paris. So this is really her first major stage role. And in fact, he's so taken with her, he promises to return for the little Jewish girl's baptism. At 12, she doesn't have a bat mitzvah, she's baptized. Yule has her baptized. Now, in a typical Sarah Bernhardt flourish, he never actually makes it to the baptism. And this is according to her autobiography. Alas, before that could happen, he was murdered by a demented priest whom he had excommunicated. Welcome to Sarah the Fabulous. I have absolutely no idea if any of this is true or not, but isn't it a great story? Um, she is baptized, and it doesn't quite do what Yule wants it to do. It does a little bit. She gets an education that can turn her into someone who passes for a lady. She's taught French literature, culture, and music, which is all great. She loves being at the convent, one reason because they've got gardens and animals. So it's her first chance to have real fresh air. She falls in love with the countryside and she will become an animal lover for the rest of her life. So there are lots of happinesses there, but it doesn't really equip her because she has no society role to come back to. And this wanting to become a nun absolutely freaks the Jewish family out. And at 15, they withdraw her from the convent. What happens then? Let me just see. There we go. So, well, this is the point at which she becomes Sarah Bernhardt. So Sarah only appears for the first time on her baptism certificate. It's the name she chooses for herself. So she's actually born, well, again, depending which certificate and which thing you believe, but it looks like her birth certificate, which had been mysteriously destroyed in a fire, by the way, but it was probably that her original names were Henriette Rosine, after Yule's two sisters, but also because Henriette or Henri is a nod towards the person that Yule wants to have been the father and might have been the father, although he will not be very happy about it and deny it and take no fatherly responsibilities. So there is an Henri there I'll tell you about. But she becomes Sarah when she's baptized, and that is her choice. And Sarah is the name that she will also choose for her stage name. Why? Well, before I carry on in order chronologically, I'm going to take you quite a bit forward to one of the people who writes about her once she is an actress, a trained actress and performing in a role. Okay. So this is one of the playwrights who writes a play, this is Le Sphinx, that Sarah Bernhardt will star in. And he describes how, unlike the other actresses, she turns up at rehearsals dressed to kill. Velvet from head to foot, with her hair all frizzy, usually holding on to a bunch of flowers. She rehearses seriously the way she's supposed to, sometimes striking beautiful poses a la Rachel. Okay. Then, when the scene's over, she bursts into dance, jumps around, sits down at the piano to accompany herself in a bizarre Negro song, which she sings very prettily. Then she stands around like a circus clown, munching on chocolates she carries in her bag and fixing her lipstick. Okay, maybe this person is not someone who would have made a great nun. But the most interesting thing about that description is a la Rachel. Okay, because a la Rachel and her idolizing Rachel is why she becomes Sarah. So who is Rachel? So Rachel is the stage name of the woman who is painted here. So this is Elizabeth Felix, who had been better known as Mademoiselle Rachel, who is an actress of Jewish origin. And she is absolutely Sarah's heroine. She's iconic before Sarah is iconic. She becomes a prominent figure in French society. And as you can see, she's like you're a little bit of a courtesan. And she's the mistress of, among others, Napoleon III. So she really achieves something in society. She's both famous and slightly infamous. But she is not just an actress, but she's a Jewish actress. And Sarah Bernhardt, however much she's baptized and says she wants to become a nun, actually, kind of in defiance of Yule, is foregrounding her Jewish identity. So you get that kind of doubling, and you get it. I mean, in this autobiography she writes called My Double Life, simultaneously as she's being baptized, she's choosing a name for herself which says Jewish and which follows a Jewish heroine. How does she become an actress? So they kind of have a state of the nation conversation back in the family home. So she's 15 or 16, depending how old. And Yule's lover at that time is Charles Duc de Mornay, who is the man pictured here. And do you remember I said Elizabeth Felix, Mademoiselle Rachel, was the mistress of Napoleon III? So he's actually the illegitimate half-brother. So, you know, the aristocracy is filled also with illegitimacy, but for them, it's not as stigmatizing as it is for those of Yule's class, as for the poor Jewish seamstress. Yule has made her way up, though, because to become the Duc de Mornay's lover, she's really pushed her way up through society. And he is the person who decides that Sarah could have a career in the theatre. He's seen her perform, including in those convent plays. And he also has many friends at the Comédie Française. So he arranges, so Bernhardt auditions. According to lots of the stories, she completely wows the audition. But actually, according to others, she's not very good. And what's more likely is that Charles Duc de Mornay puts a word in with his friends and gets her into the conservatoire. I suspect it's a mixture of both. Nothing is ever clear. She studies acting, and quite interestingly, she wins prizes, or she comes second and third and gets honourable mentions for her roles for tragedy. She's much more successful in her comedy roles. She wins second prize across the whole conservatoire for a comedy role. But the family aren't happy with this. You know, they don't want a comedian, they want a serious actress, or they want her to have a serious life. Yule stigmatizes her, makes fun of her, tells her she's not very good. And she gets out of the conservatoire and she doesn't automatically get a place at the Comédie Française, which is the next training ground. It's a bit like if you're in England, all those actors like Judi Dench, Juliet Stevenson, Emma Thompson, they did drama school, but then a lot of them spent a couple of years in rep with the Royal Shakespeare Company. That's what the Comédie Française is. The Conservatoire is the drama school, but the Comédie Française is like the repertory theatre. It's where they get a grounding playing roles, and it's really the next step on. And she doesn't automatically do well enough to get the role she seeks, but the Duc de Mornay wangles her in. This is the Comédie Française, and it becomes both the making and the ruining of Sarah. The making of her, because it's where much more the conservatoire gives her the skills, but it's the breaking of her because she just does not fit in. And it's the first place she's going to encounter real, sincere, deep anti-Semitism. You know, at the convent, she was the little Jewish girl, but they kind of adored her and they just thought, we'll make her Christian. She was a threat at the Comédie Française because she was an outsider. A lot of the others were children of wealthy people. But she had powerful connections. So she was both suspicious as an outsider, but because she had powerful people who could pull strings for her, people were very jealous of her. She was mixed in her roles. And one of the things that happened was she actually brought her youngest sister, Regine, to a celebration of Molière one day. And Regine tread on the train of one of the big established actresses, Natalie. And Natalie was furious at her and screamed at her. And Sarah Bernhardt jumped to Regine's defence. She had no control over her temper. It was not a wise thing to do, but she completely bawled out this very established actress. She lost her temper. In some of the accounts, she even struck out with her umbrella and accidentally struck a security guard. He later on says she was so apologetic to him, and when she was wealthy, she came back and gave him the money to enable him to retire. So he was very fond of her, but that got her thrown out of the Comédie Française. And I'm not sure it would have happened to someone else. It was her loss of temper, but it was also because she was considered to be beneath an other. And it took her many, many years after that to re-establish herself, even though she had the training ground. And during those years where she was struggling, it seems like, we're not quite sure what happened, it seems like Yule pimped her out to some of Yule's own lovers, and she began to use men to get herself roles because that was the only thing she knew how to do, even though she was actually a good actress. Her family, Yule was partly pimping her out not to get her roles as an actress, but Yule was desperate for one of the lovers to marry her. She thought she should give up the acting. She told, so the grandmother, Yule's stepmother, told Sarah that they didn't want her to be like Yule, and in fact they wanted her to be with someone respectable like a glover, a tanner, or a pharmacist. And at the time she complained to her then best friend Therese Berton, my mother isn't married herself yet she wants me to be a wife. But on the other hand, my mother's a Jewess and she doesn't want her daughter to be a nun. So on the one hand, her mother didn't want her to be a nun. That wasn't just a reference to the convent, but to the sexual politics, but also the Jewishness was very, very important. But Yule really did want her to marry and settle down. This was not going to happen. What happened instead was one of Yule's, actually, one of the things I was going to just highlight is I say then best friend Therese Berton because later in her life Sarah would actually seduce Therese's husband, who is her leading man at the time, and Therese will write some of the most vindictive biographical material about Sarah as well. So on the one hand, Therese kind of writes very sympathetic portrayals of Sarah's early life. Later, Therese writes some of the most anti-Semitic and cruel depictions of her because she's so hurt by Sarah's seduction of Pierre. So very complicated. But what happens in the meantime is one of the people in Yule's circle is Alexandre Dumas, Père. So you've got Père and Fils, you've got the two Alexandre Dumas, father and son, but it's the father who is the novelist of the Three Musketeers, and also a playwright who is really important. He's one of Yule's circle, and he gives Sarah roles in the plays that he writes. I'm showing you this, which is the Dumas on the centime note, because that's one of the things that wows Sarah. Here are these men who are even on the banknotes and they're taking an interest in her. They are part of a whole circle with people of Victor Hugo who are kind of avant-garde, against the grain, and who are very supportive of her. And actually, she does really well in the roles that they give her. She starts off in small roles and then becomes a leading lady. Takes her a while. Her first few performances aren't great, but because they continue to give her roles, she matures, and that's when she starts to get rave reviews. Some of those other men are Victor Hugo. She is 27-ish, he is 70-something-ish. He says to her that he's really in love, not with his wife, with his mistress Juliet, but Juliet is close to his age and he prefers young flesh. Very complicated. Victor Hugo, at some level, is a great hero of mine, not only a fantastic writer, but fantastic politically. In terms of women, he's really difficult. And Sarah kind of loves him, but uses him. So it's a complicated relationship. But she also has affairs with Edward, Prince of Wales, and Charles Hasse, who's one of the inspirations for Proust's Swan. Again, maybe we'll do Proust some other time. She's the model for Proust's Burma, Proust's great female heroine. Oscar Wilde, by the way, writes Salome for her. Again, that's going to come up next week when we discuss Claude Cahun, because that's a very Jewish performance. And she's married to the man who's thought to be the model for Dracula. He's the one man she marries of all the ones she has affairs with. And it's kind of inevitable they will meet. This is Madame Pierre Berton, Therese Berton's comment. Their two natures were inevitably attracted towards each other. Daimler boasted to his friends that as soon as he looked at her, the great Sarah Bernhardt would be counted in his long list of victims. Bernhardt was no less certain she only had to command for Daimler to succumb. The marriage fell apart though because she had him be her leading man and he was a terrible actor. So that was kind of the end of it. So it was one of those relationships. The son she had was not with Damala. The son was from an affair with Henri, Prince de Ligne. Okay. So Yule had said that one of the possibilities for Sarah's fatherness, for Sarah's father, was a royal. And Sarah was copying her mother and she had affairs with lots of minor royalty. She had an affair. Henri denies it. He gives her money, though, for a little bit of money to support Maurice, but he won't really admit to this being his son. So we don't know if that's true or not. But Maurice becomes the apple of Sarah's eye. She spoils him shamefully. And they're close all their lives, with one period of 2 years as the exception, which I'm going to try to move on to in my last kind of 7 or 8 minutes or so. But Maurice, probably, forget all the men, Maurice is the love of her life. But I want to go on to her acting, because all that emotion she has in her personal life, she feeds into her roles. And D.H. Lawrence describes her as the incarnation of violent emotion, liberating the primitive passions of woman. Okay. I'm going to show you a little bit of her playing. I want to talk about her as an actor, but I'm not sure we would agree she is the primitive passions, or even that she's natural. This is her playing Queen Elizabeth I. It's a little movie clip I found. I'm going to move it on slightly. This is where the lover Essex is executed. And let's see if we can take it onto her entry. So the Queen visits the body and discovers the ring that she gave Essex is missing. So here she is. Sarah's about to come in. And it is a silent movie, by the way. You can't hear the sound. Here she comes. This is the most natural actor that they've seen in generations. So it's kind of a lovely clip, but it kind of doesn't do her justice. It doesn't do justice to her charisma. I mean, it kind of shows you who she is, but it also doesn't give you what the owner of the theatre that really launches her career says, which is she's not just talented and gifted, but she has rare intelligence and limitless energy and willpower. Okay. And that's what I want to go to, because the whole time she's playing in the theatre, she is also creating herself as a person. Henry James describes her when she arrives in the USA as having advertising genius. She's too American not to succeed in America. What does he mean by this? She's not just coming and playing all these famous roles like the Sphinx in La Dame or Camille, but she's giving herself a catchphrase, quand même. She is taking amazing photographs, and she's becoming a newspaper story because she travels in a train, and this is how she travels. Not only are the actors on the train with her, but she takes a small zoo with her on the train across America, including cheetahs, tiger, lion cubs, a monkey named Darwin, and an alligator named Ali Gaga that she used to sleep with until its untimely death due to a diet of milk and champagne. She wears a hat made of a stuffed bat. She dripped with jewels and is draped with chinchilla and ocelot furs, and sleeps in a coffin which she travels with. Okay. She becomes a person off stage and on. That advertising genius is really what makes her. because she is the person for whom the beginning of Art Nouveau poster art is created. This is Alphonse Mucha. Again, there's a whole story about him. He's a Czech artist, possibly with some Jewish heritage. He's a very poor artist. And in fact, he's trying to earn money and he's working. She's at the Theatre de la Renaissance in a performance named Gismonda. Gismonda is about to extend its run, and he's working in a print shop as an engraver. But it's over the Christmas period, possibly because he's Jewish. Again, it's very confusing looking at his identity. He's officially Christian, but there's some issues. But anyway, he's living amongst the Belle Juive with the Jewish artists, and he's happy to work over Christmas. He's the engraver on call when she phones up and says, we're extending the run. I need a poster for Gismonda by the 1st of January. This is him. He's someone, this is how his paintings normally are, very serious paintings about politics. This is the grim, dreary 1890s Paris. And he has the idea that if he's not going to do the poster like he's painting, he's not going to have something dreary. He wants to brighten up Paris. And this is what he makes for her. And it causes an immediate sensation. And this 26-year-old kid, he's launched to fame as well. He creates these posters that become all over Paris and start the Art Nouveau movement. And she gives him a 6-year contract to produce more. He will produce posters for every performance she does. I'm showing you here Medea. I'm showing you the American tour and La Dame or Camille, which is probably her most famous role. But I want to look at some of those posters because can you see in Medea, there is a bracelet. That is a very real bracelet he's made for her. And in fact, in all the posters, there are clues to her real life. So here she is as La Samaritaine, and look what's behind her head. Oh, actually, I need to go on here first. Can you see the Yud He Vav He? Can you see the stars? Art Nouveau is he takes in all sorts of different influences. For the stars, he uses Magen David's. The La Samaritaine writing, he uses Hebrew writing style to create it. He's also got Greek and Roman and Egyptian and other influences in there, but there's a very distinct Hebraic and Jewish influence, and it's one of the reasons she chooses him and she goes with his poster in the very beginning. I'm showing you here, some people go, oh, he's only doing that because La Samaritaine is a biblical story. But actually, if you look at La Dame or Camille, you can see the Magen David in the background there too. And it's a little shared thing between them that they have about the Jewishness. And here you can see really up close, and you can see there the name of God behind the head. I want to show you, though, how clever he is and the reason she goes with him. So most of the posters, this is the face he uses and the pose he uses, like La Dame or Camille. But in Gismonda is that very first image he has her facing the other way. And he has her dressed not with references to Gismonda, but with references to something else. This is a sculpture of Ophelia. And it's very interesting. So this is 1896 that he creates this poster. The sculpture is at least 10 years old, probably 15. I'm going to show you the given date for it, but again, that's a little bit odd. When I showed this, I've only taught this session once before, but when I showed it to my class, I said to them, who do you think made the sculpture? And everyone said Rodin. And in fact, Rodin had a studio very near Sarah Bernhardt's studio, and he was a friend of Mucha. But it isn't a Rodin piece. It is actually Sarah Bernhardt herself. She sculpted, she made artists, she made paintings. She was a phenomenal artist in her own right. And how did Mucha get the gig? Well, he based that Gismonda on Sarah Bernhardt's own self-portrait as Ophelia. and you can see it there. Sarah Bernhardt as an artist is much less well known than as an actress, but it's one of the reasons people resented her. She was too multi-talented. And in fact, an earlier work she'd done, After the Storm, had received an honourable mention at the Paris Salon. I mean, it was exhibited along people like Cézanne, Pissarro, some of those early Impressionists. And there is Sarah Bernhardt. This one is probably the most controversial. This is an inkwell, it's bronze. She takes it around and has it at performances, but it becomes something she very much regrets doing because it gets used to create anti-Semitic images of her. This bust of Medea is also something that becomes the basis. The person who teaches her to sculpt, by the way, is the person who falls in love with her, and I would say maybe is one of her longest standing relationships. Whether that love is romantic or sexual is another thing, but it is the artist Louise Abema, and she teaches Sarah Bernhardt a lot of her art skills and will be a lifelong friend. And she herself is lesbian, so there is questions over what kind of relationship it was. She paints Sarah, she loves Sarah, and she paints her in a flattering way. But her portrait gets used for some of the anti-Semitic stereotypes. And I've just got about 3 or 4 minutes, and then I want to give a couple of minutes for questions. So I'm just going to finish on some of these. Can you see the money bags round her throat? They've taken the bat and they've combined her as a magpie stealing money and stealing things from other people and the idea of flight. This is again used for another image. I'm just going to point out the harp here. And one of the things that's used to attack her is skeleton Sarah. She's too thin. You know, she's too Jewish, she's too foreign, she's too thin. And one of her supporters says this: how droll, not content with finding her thin or declaring her mad, they want to regulate her daily activities. Let a law be passed immediately to prevent the accumulation of talent. That supporter who's decrying her critics are Émile Zola. And again, I'm going to go into this in much more depth next week when I talk about Claude Cahun. I will talk about Dreyfus. But you might know Zola because he is one of the few people that support the Jewish captain Alfred Dreyfus when he is accused of being a traitor. Zola writes this letter that is on the front page of the biggest paper of the time, criticising the President of the Republic and the police for the cover-up. Why does Zola write it? Partly because Sarah Bernhardt encourages him. Zola, the non-Jew, she feels is a much better voice than she, the Jewish voice. And this is her letter writing to Zola, supporting Dreyfus. I said before that she loved Morris, but Morris and she don't speak for 2 years because he is anti-Dreyfus. She'd made him the manager of her theatre. He's a complete wastrel, and I'll talk about that if anyone has questions later. But she funds him and gives him jobs throughout his life, and he's scared that supporting Dreyfus would endanger what they've built. So he won't, but she will. This is a cartoon that appears of dinner parties. And again, if anyone has questions about it, I'll tell you about the story of the dinner party it was based on. But there they are having a nice dinner party and Dreyfus is mentioned and then it falls apart. And here she is. This is another caricature where the clerical vultures are coming to attack her son and she's warding them off. She protects her son, but then she herself becomes a vulture in some of the other images. She's critiqued the great actresses with the Jews against the army. Even after the Franco-Prussian War, she said, Jewish, most certainly, German, no. They've been talking about her being German. And again, I can take that on in the questions. But she is absolutely determined to say, I'm not German, but I am Jewish. This is another anti-Semitic critique. Whether initiated into the worship of God by Gemara or Catechism, Sarah Bernhardt is neither more nor less than a Jewess and nothing but a Jewess. And her response, if I have a foreign accent, which I must regret, it's cosmopolitan but not Teutonic. I'm a daughter of the great Jewish race, and my somewhat uncultivated language is the outcome of our enforced wanderings. She will not play. You know, she's this amazing actress. She's famous. She's a self-created figure out of nothing. She's denied her Germanness. She's been baptized. She could have denied her Jewishness, but she doesn't. And I think for me, that's one of the things that makes her so interesting. There's a whole story around this theatre. I mentioned earlier it gets renamed by the Nazis, it's taken off, but it becomes the site of all sorts of political questions. And throughout, she manages it. She manages many other theatres. She does so as a Jew. She will put on plays that reference her Jewish identity, but she'll also do patriotic French work. There is a whole thing that John Gielgud does about her declaiming a long patriotic poem. I'm going to stop because I want to give you time, 5 minutes for questions, but I just want to finish with this image because however much the critics of her decry her Jewishness, decry her lack of patriotism because she's a Jew, in the First World War, the French soldiers adore her and take her to their heart. This is one of her last performances, and she is performing for the soldiers. She's had a history since the Anglo-Prussian War, since the Franco-Prussian War, of supporting the soldiers. And this is really her last great performance. And this is when France takes her to the heart and she becomes someone. They will put on stamps. And again, there is a Jewish hidden image behind the stamp that is chosen on her death. And they will give her a funeral fit for royalty. Thank you so much. Gila has disappeared, but maybe Ari, did you want to take a question or two?
I am here. I'm the backup to the backup. So Gila had to go to the bomb shelter. And we hope she's safe and everybody is safe. But I will, first of all, thank you so much. I learned so much about Sarah Bernhardt, and I think our audience did well. I doubt many people knew as much. And I assume we could have spent a month on Sarah Bernhardt. You had so much to say, and I know that you were rushing through. I do want to thank Shirelle for meeting you at Limmud and bringing you to our CSP screen, because we've learned so much fascinating things. So here are a few questions, and people feel free to put your questions in. Chat is open, and we've had challenges with the chat lately because I think that it's been changed by the system people. So I'm going to make sure it's actually open for everybody. Okay. So the first question is, well, let's talk about her Jewish issue, because you kind of just jumped into it. So did the whole Jewishness about her, did that start because of Dreyfus, or was she also outwardly Jewish before that? That's the first question.
So really, there are so many moments that she shifts, and she is someone who's a chameleon. But there are all these political moments, and I think one of the moments she really takes on her Jewishness is in 1871. So I was speeding. I again had over prepared, but I think one of the key moments really is the Franco-Prussian War. And two things happen. One is she uses all her Jewish contacts to turn her theatre into a hospital. She reaches out to all those famous men her mother knew, but she also reaches out to people in the Jewish community, and she stocks it. You know, somebody provides toilet paper, somebody provides chocolate, somebody provides coffee, somebody provides stretchers. And she does this thing where she brings wounded soldiers into the theatre. Now, while she's doing that, she sends her family out of the country for safety because Paris is being bombed. I mean, we don't realise it, but, you know, the Franco-Prussian War devastates France. And she thinks that her family have gone to Holland, where her grandfather's from. And she later finds out, they later tell her that they've actually gone to Frankfurt in Germany, which is where the family are from before that. And she is absolutely furious because Germans are the enemy. And that's when she begins to unpick what her family are and who she is. And that's when she goes, hang on, I'm French and I'm French Dutch. I don't want to face the fact that some of the roots of our family were German before that, because Prussian is the enemy. But I will take on my Jewishness. And that really gets developed because straight after the Franco-Prussian War, there's the whole student commune revolt. I don't know if you've anyone seen Days of the Commune by Brecht or Les Miserables, this uprising. And actually, she is again in this kind of hugely difficult political moment where she has to figure out who she is. And what she comes up with is, I'm a Jew. I'm a French Jew. And that's whenever anyone challenges her, she goes, I don't know much about Jewishness, but I know who I am.
Hmm, very interesting. And is that when the anti-Semitism, the images that you suggest, is that when that all comes up then in reaction to
It's
her?
Yeah, I mean, one of the problems during the commune period is that she's dating someone who is an anti-revolutionary and she leaves him quite quickly, but it enables people to put things on her. But the other thing is her huge success, that advertising marketing brain that she has that turns her life. I mean, throughout the 1880s and 90s, that turns her life into as much of the subject as what she does on stage and makes her a star, makes her absolutely, she's nouveau rich, she's the daughter of a prostitute. It makes her the subject of attack, and she's Hollywood before Hollywood. And what they kind of do is she's that Jew, she's foreign and she's a Jew, and she's not someone we in society want to associate with.
So
So
interesting and worthy of more study and time. People asked about, since you brought up questions about her parentage and also the parentage of her son. I mean, I assume in the age of DNA studies, people can now get answers. So have people done are people doing that research out of interest?
I'm sure someone is. I don't know for definite because I'm a kind of accidental Sarah Bernhardt scholar. You'll find out next week where it kind of goes into the things I study. But one of the really interesting things is she had two granddaughters and they were very insistent on keeping her identity alive and they have had children. So I'm sure at some point someone is, if they haven't already, going to do some analysis.
Okay, we'll do some
Keep
research
an
as
eye
well
out. Well,
in the
yeah,
next
maybe
few
Ari,
days.
you're a brilliant researcher. You might
We
look
will
at it.
find her.
Yeah.
Um, we're in overtime, so a few other quick questions. People ask, what was the hidden Jewish imagery in that stamp that you showed us? Because it went very quickly. You said, here's a
Okay.
stamp. There's something
All
hidden
right.
in there.
So let me just show you. So this was actually the stamp. Let me see if I can show it online. This was the stamp that was used from a painting. And it was the one that was kind of on her death, but she kind of knew it was coming. And let me just make my screen big for a minute. Um, you can see the stamp is taken just from the bigger painting and it doesn't really show what she's looking at. And the painting it's actually from, here we go. The painting it's actually from, can you see, has David playing the harp? So although she's had the profile cut out, so it just shows who she is, what she's looking at is David playing a harp. And she's chosen that specifically because, sorry, the other way, in this cartoon, although it was supposedly sympathetic, it was also making fun of her. And one of the images that they've got, because they're like, who does she think she is to be an artist and a theatre, to wear trousers? And again, this harp, which is a reference to the psalmist harp, is one of the little critiques of her Jewishness. So that deliberate choice of that stamp where what she's looking at is David's harp, I think is very interesting.
Very nice. Um, so last two questions. One is, so where is Sandra Bernhardt today in the world of theater? And maybe we can compare in Europe or France and the United
Mm.
States. And I kind of feel like her name came up with people like Lady Gaga, but maybe I just imagined that.
No, not at all. I think that performativity is amazing. I mean, one of the things that's so interesting, and I was trying to cram it all into an hour, but a lot of that original footage of the early silent movie star is now being unearthed and looked at. Um, a lot of actors kind of talk about her. I mean, there's all sorts of other Jewish reference, but certainly in France, she is thought of now as one of the most important stage actresses they had. She's buried. I mean, I was trying to show you that things changed and things actually changed because of the First World War. But she was buried as a great patriotic heroine. Hundreds of thousands of people came to her funeral. Throughout the 20s, 30s, 40s, she was absolutely taken to heart. During the Nazi occupation, they got rid of her. And I would say from the Nazi occupation to the 1990s, she was not talked about much in France. And actually, it was a big project through, I'd say the late 80s, but really the early 90s and 2000s to revive her reputation. And nowadays, she's being hugely taken on. And I think that that Bernhardt's Hamlet, which Janet McTeer did, was one of the moments that she came back in America, but she'd come back much earlier in Britain because there'd been a lot of radio plays on BBC Radio during the 80s and 90s about her life as well as playing with her role. And also, the more people looked at Victor Hugo in France and created him as a great socialist hero, the more they had to engage with Bernhardt as well. So she's now absolutely admired.
Terrific, amazing. How old was she when she died, and what did she die from? And then we'll wrap it up here.
Okay. So she died in 1923 and she was born in 1844. So can someone do the quick math for me?
In her 80s? I don't
Hmm.
know. Okay.
Yeah, late 70s, early 80s. I can't do math. I'm a literary person, but not a numbers person. Um, she Well, it was kind of old age, but she had some very serious issues. So that one-leggedness was she had her leg cut off. It had been infected, and that infection had spread. And actually, she was very weak following that, although the amputation did keep her alive for a lot longer. But she had lung problems, and she had lung problems going back to childhood. There are some stories that as a baby, the house was on fire and she was rescued from a fire, and that was why. Again, we don't know the truth or not, but a kind of combination of the lung and the heart failure is thought to be what it was. Thank you, Faith, for doing the math for us. 79. Brilliant.
So we'll wrap it up because I have to go to a Father's Day. Oh, Gila made it back. Gila, you're okay. Good. We're wrapping it
Yes,
up,
I'm
Gila.
safe, and I apologize to everybody.
It's okay.
It's
We
just a
managed.
sign of the
We
time.
managed. It would have been better with you, but we pulled it off. The fact that you're safe is terrific. Aviva presented a really compelling background of our of Sarah and Bernhardt, and many of us are going to now go and read more, I assume. So Aviva, tell us what's coming up next week. Do a quick promo, and then we'll wrap it up.
Okay. So here is the link. One of those shows that I showed you was Oscar Wilde's Salome. The person who designed that and translated Wilde was the uncle of Claude Cahun, who is the avant-garde modernist artist. And when you're talking about Bernhardt's influences, Claude Cahun performed her life because of the influence of Sarah Bernhardt. We're going to look at her as an artist, but more importantly, we're going to look at her as a resistance heroine during World War II, because under Nazi occupation, she led the resistance on the Channel Islands. And I'm going to give you her life and work and also tell you some of my personal connection there.
Terrific. Thank you. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. Um, and look forward to seeing you on CSP this week. I want to thank all of our supporters, and I just hope that everybody keeps safe this week, particularly in Israel, but wherever you are. And we look forward to seeing you on CSP. Take care, everybody. Happy Father's Day.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for being with me.
Bye.